Hey guys, welcome to my channel, Know Better, Do Better with Jess. We're moving on to day 7 of my daily video Christmas countdown, and now we are on part 3 of the Christmas book by Frank Baums, The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus. I'm not sure if we'll finish it today or there'll be one more day. Let's just see how far we get. Chapter 5, How Bessie Blithesome Came to the Laughing Valley. One day as Claus sat before his door to enjoy the sunshine, while he busily carved the head and horns of a toy deer, he looked up and discovered a glittering cavalcade of horsemen approaching through the valley. When they drew near, he saw that the band consisted of a score of men-at-arms, clad in bright armor, and bearing in their hands spears and battle-axes. In front of these rode little Bessie Blithesome, the pretty daughter of the proud Lord of Lurd, who once driven Claus from his palace. Her palfrey was pure white, its bridle was covered with glittering gems, and its saddle draped with cloths of gold. Richly embroidered, the soldiers were sent to protect her from harm while she journeyed. Claus was surprised, but he continued to whittle and to sing until the cavalcade drew up before him. Then the little girl leaned over the neck of her palfrey and said, "Please, Mr. Claus, I want a toy." Her voice was so pleading that Claus jumped up at once and stood beside her, but he was puzzled how to answer her request. "You are a rich lord's daughter," said he, "and have all that you desire." "Except toys," added Bessie. "There are no toys in all the world but yours." "And I make them for the poor children, who have nothing else to amuse them," continued Claus. "Do poor children love to play with toys more than rich ones?" asked Bessie. "I suppose not," said Claus thoughtfully. "Am I to blame because my father is a lord? Must I be denied the pretty toys I long for because other children are poorer than me?" she inquired earnestly. "I'm afraid you must, dear," he answered, "for the poor have nothing else with which to amuse themselves. You have your pony to ride, your servants to wait on you, and every comfort that money can procure." "But I want toys," cried Bessie, wiping away the tears that forced themselves into her eyes. "If I cannot have them, I shall be very unhappy." Claus was troubled, for her grief recalled to him the thought that this desire was to make all children happy, without regard to their condition in life. Yet, while so many poor children were clamoring for his toys, he could not bear to give one of them to Bessie Blithesome, who had so much already to make her happy. "Listen, my child," said he gently. "All the toys I'm now making are promised to others, but the next shall be yours, since your heart so longs for it. Come to me again in 2 days, and it shall be ready for you." Bessie gave a cry of delight, and leaning over her pony's neck, she kissed Claus prettily upon his forehead. Then, calling to her men-at-arms, she rode gaily away, leaving Claus to resume his work. If I am to supply the rich children as well as the poor ones," he thought, "I shall not have a spare moment in the whole year. But it is right I should give to the rich. Surely I must go to Necile and talk with her about this matter." So when he had finished the toy deer, which was like a deer he had known in the forest glades, he walked into Burzee and made his way to the bower of the beautiful nymph Necile, who had been his foster mother. She greeted him tenderly and lovingly, listened with interest to his story of the visit of Bessie Blithesome. "And now tell me," said he, "shall I give toys to the rich children?" "We of the forest know nothing of riches," she replied. "It seemed to me that the one child is like another child, since they're all made of the same clay, and the riches are like a gown, which may be put on or taken away, leaving the child unchanged. But the fairies are guardians of mankind, and know mortal children better than I. Let us call the fairy queen." That was done, and the queen of the fairies sat beside them and heard Claus relate his reason for thinking the rich children could get along without his toys, and also what the nymph had said. "Necile is right," declared the queen, "for whether it be rich or poor, a child longing for pretty playthings are but natural. Rich Bessie's heart may suffer as much grief as poor Mary's. She can be just as lonely and discontented, and just as gay and happy. I think, friend Claus, it is your duty to make all the little ones glad, whether they chance to live in palaces or in cottages." "Your words are wise, fair queen," replied Claus, "and my heart tells me they are as just as they are wise. Hereafter all children may claim my services." Then he bowed before the gracious fairy, kissing Nasile's red lips, went back into the valley. At the brook he stopped to drink, and afterwards he sat on the bank, took a piece of moist clay in his hands, while he thought what sort of toy he should make for Bessie Blossom. He did not notice that his fingers were working the clay into the shape until, glancing downward, he found he unconsciously formed a head that bore a slight resemblance to the nymph Lucille. At once he became interested. Gathering more of the clay from the bank, he carried it to his house. Then, with the aid of his knife and a bit of wood, he succeeded in working the clay into the image of a toy nymph. With skilled strokes he formed long waving hair on the head and covered the body with a gown of oak leaves, while the 2 feet sticking out at the bottom of the gown were clad in sandals. But the clay was soft, and Claus found he must handle it gently to avoid ruining his pretty work. Perhaps the ray of the sun will draw out the moisture and cause the clay to become hard, he thought. So he laid the image on a flat board and placed it in the glare of the sun. This done, he went to his bench and began painting the toy deer. And soon he became so interested in the work that he forgot all about the clay nymph. But next morning happened to notice that as it lay on the board, he found the sun had baked it to the hardness of stone, and it was strong enough to be safely handled. Claus now painted the nymph with great care in the likeness of Nasile, giving it deep blue eyes, white teeth, rosy lips, and ruddy brown hair. The gown he colored oak leaf green, and when the paint was dry, Claus himself was charmed with the new toy. Of course it was not nearly as lovely as the real Nasile, but considering the material of which it was made, Claus thought it was very beautiful. When Bessie, riding upon her white palfrey, came to his dwelling the next day, Claus presented her with the new toy. The little girl's eyes were brighter than ever as she examined the pretty image, and she loved it at once and held it close to her breast, as a mother does to her child. "What is it called, Claus?" she asked. Now Claus knew that nymphs do not like to be spoken of by mortals, so he could not tell Bessie it was an image of Nasile he had given her. But as it was a new toy, he searched his mind for a new name to call it, and the first word he thought of he decided he would do very well. "It's called a dolly, my dear," he said to Bessie. "I shall call the dolly my baby," returned Bessie, kissing it fondly, "and I shall tend it and care for it just as a nurse cares for me. Thank you very much, Claus. Your gift has made me happier than I have ever been before." Then she rode away, hugging the toy in her arms, and Claus, seeing her delight, thought he would make another dolly, better and more natural than the first. He brought more clay from the brook, and remembering that Bessie had called the dolly her baby, he resolved to form this one into a baby's image. That was not difficult task to the clever workman, and soon the baby dolly was lying on the board and placed in the sun to dry. Then with the clay that was left, he began to make an image of Bessie Blossom herself. This was not so easy, for he found he could not make the silken robe of the Lord's daughter out of the common clay. So he called the fairies to his aid and asked them to bring him colored silks with which to make a real dress for the clay image. The fairies set off at once on their errand, and before nightfall they returned with a generous supply of silks and laces and golden thread. Claus now became impatient to complete his new dolly, and instead of waiting for the next day's sun, he placed the clay image upon the hearth, covered it over with glowing coals. By morning, when he drew the dolly from the ashes, it had baked as hard as it had lain in a full day of the hot sun. Now our Claus became a dressmaker as well as a toy maker. He cut the lavender silk and nearly sewed it into a beautiful gown that just fitted the new dolly, and he put a lace collar around its neck and pink silk shoes on its feet. The natural color of the baked clay is a light gray, but Claus painted the face to resemble the color of flesh, and he gave the dollies Bessie brown eyes and golden hair and rosy cheeks. It was really a beautiful thing to look upon, and sure to bring joy to some children's heart. While Claus was admiring it, he heard a knock at the door, and little Mary entered. Her face was sad, and her eyes red with continued weeping. "Why, what has grieved you, my dear?" asked Claus, taking the child in his arms. I broke my cat," sobbed Mary. "How?" he inquired, his eyes twinkling. I dropped him, and it broke off his tail, and then I dropped him, and it broke off his ear, and now it's all spoiled." Claus laughed. "Never mind, Mary dear," he said. "How would you like this new dolly instead of a cat?" Mary looked at the silk-robed dolly, and her eyes grew big with astonishment. "Oh, Claus," she cried, clapping her small hands together with rapture. "Can I have the beautiful lady? Do you like it?" he asked. "I love it," she said. "It's better than cats." "Then take it, dear, and be careful not to break it." Mary took the dolly with joy that was almost reverent, and her face dimpled with smiles as she started along the path towards home. Chapter 6. I must now tell you something about the Ogwals. That was a terrible race of creatures that caused our good Claus so much trouble and nearly succeeded in robbing the children of the world of their earliest and best friend. I do not like to mention the Ogwals, but they're a part of this history and cannot be ignored. They were neither mortals nor immortals, but stood midway between those classes of beings. The Ogwals were invisible to ordinary people, but not to immortals. They could pass swiftly through the air from one part of the world to another, and had the power of influencing the minds of human beings to do their wicked will. They were of gigantic stature and had coarse, scowling countenance, which shone plainly on the hatred of all mankind. They possessed no conscience whatsoever, and delighted only in evil deeds. Their homes were in rocky, mountainous places, from whence they sailed forth to accomplish their wicked purposes. The one of their number that could think of the most horrible deed for them to do was always elected King Ogwa, and at the race obeyed his orders. Sometimes these creatures lived to become 100 years old, but usually they fought so fiercely among themselves that many were destroyed in combat, and when they died, that was the end of them. Mortals were powerless to harm them, and the immortals shuddered when the Ogwans were mentioned, and always avoided them. So they flourished for many years, unopposed, and accomplished much evil. I'm glad to assure you that these vile creatures have long since perished and passed from the earth, but in the days when Claus was making his first toys, they were a numerous and powerful tribe. One of the principal sports of the Ogwas was to inspire angry passions in the hearts of little children, so that they quarreled and fought with one another. They would tempt boys to eat of unripe fruits, and then delight in the pain that they suffered. They urged little girls to disobey their parents, and then would laugh when the children were punished. I do not know what causes a child to be naughty in these days, but when the Ogwas were on the earth, naughty children were usually under their influence. Now, when Claus began to make children happy, he kept them out of the power of the Ogwas, for children possessing such lovely playthings as he gave them had no wish to obey the evil thoughts the Ogwas tried to thrust into their minds. Therefore, one year when the wicked tribe was to elect a new king, they chose an Ogwa who proposed to destroy Claus and take him away from the children. There are, as you know, fewer naughty children in the world since Claus came to the Laughing Valley and began to make his toys, said the new king, as he squatted upon a rock and looked around at the scowling faces of his people. While Bessie Blossom has not stomped her foot once this month, nor has Mary's brother slapped his sister's face or thrown the puppy into the rain barrel. Little Weekum took his bath last night without screaming or struggling, because his mother promised he should take his toy cat to bed with him. Such a condition of affairs is awful for any Ogwa to think of, and the only way we can direct the naughty actions of children is to take this person Claus away from them. Good, good, cried the big Ogwas in a chorus. They clapped their hands to applaud the speech of the king. But what shall we do with them? Asked one of the creatures. I have a plan, replied the wicked king, and his plan you will soon discover. That night Claus went to bed feeling very happy, for he had completed no less than 4 pretty toys during the day, and they were sure, he thought, to make 4 little children happy. But while he slept, the band of invisible Ogwas surrounded his bed, bound him with stout cords, and then flew away with him to the middle of a dark forest and far off Aethop, where they laid him down and left him. When morning came, Claus found himself thousands of miles from any human being, a prisoner in the wild jungle of an unknown land. From the limb of a tree above his head swayed a huge python. One of these reptiles are able to crush a man's bones in their coils. A few yards away crouched a savage panther, its glaring red eyes fixed full on the helpless Claus. One of those monstrous spotted spiders, whose sting is death, crept stealthily toward him over the matted leaves, which shriveled and turned black at its very touch. But Claus had been reared in Burzee and was not afraid. "Come to me, you cooks of the forest," he cried, and gave the low, peculiar whistle that the Knooks knew. The panther, which was about to spring upon its victim, turned and slunk away. The python swung itself into the tree and disappeared among the leaves. The spider stopped short in its advance and hid beneath a rotting log. Claus had no time to notice them, for he was surrounded by a band of harsh-featured Knooks, more crooked and deformed in appearance than any he had ever seen. "Who are you that call on us?" demanded one in a gruff voice. "The friend of your brothers in Burzee," answered Claus. "I've been brought here by my enemies, the Awgwas, and left to perish miserably. Yet now I implore your help to release me and send me to my home again." "Have you the sign?" asked another. "Yes," said Claus. They cut his bonds, and with his free arms he made the secret sign of the Knooks. Instantly they assisted him to stand upon the feet, and he brought him food and drink to strengthen him. "Our brothers of Burzee make weird friends," grumbled an ancient Knook, whose flowing beard was pure white. "But he who knows our secret sign and signal is entitled to our help, whoever he may be. Close your eyes, stranger, and we will conduct you to your home. Where shall we seek it?" "'Tis in the Laughing Valley," answered Claus, shutting his eyes. "This is but one Laughing Valley in the known world, so we cannot go astray," remarked the Knook. As he spoke, the sound of his voice seemed to die away, so Claus opened his eyes to see what caused the change. To his astonishment, he found himself seated on the bench by his own door, with the Laughing Valley spread out before him. That day he visited the wood nymphs and related his adventure to Queen Zurlie and Necile. "The Awgwas have become your enemies," said the lovely queen thoughtfully, "so we must do all we can to protect you from their power." "It was cowardly to bind him while he slept," remarked Necile with indignation. "The evil ones are ever cowardly," answered Zurline, "but our friend's slumber shall not be disturbed again." The queen herself came to the dwelling of Claus that evening, placed her seal on every door and window to keep out the Awgwas, and under the seal of Queen Zurline was placed the seal of the fairies, and the seal of the Ryls, and the seal of the Knooks, and the charm might become more powerful. And Claus carried his toys to the children again, and made many more of the little ones happy. You may guess how angry the King Awgwa and his fierce band were when it was known to them that Claus had escaped from the forest of Ethop. They raged madly for a whole week, and then another meeting among the rocks. "It's useless to carry him where the Knooks reign," said the king, "for he has their protection. So let us cast him into a cave of our own mountains, where he will surely perish." This was promptly agreed to, and the wicked band set out that night to seize Claus. But they found his dwelling guarded by the seals of the immortals, and were obliged to go away, baffled and disappointed. "Never mind," said the king, "he does not sleep always." Next day, as Claus traveled to the village across the plain, where he intended to present a toy squirrel to a lame boy, he was suddenly set upon by the Awgwas, who seized him and carried him away to the mountains. There they thrust him within a deep cavern, and rolled many huge rocks against the entrance to prevent his escape. Deprived thus of light and food, and with little air to breathe, our Claus was indeed in a pitiful plight. But he spoke the mystic words of the fairies, which always command their friendly aid, and they came to his rescue, and transported him to the Laughing Valley in the twinkling of an eye. Thus the Awgwas discovered they might not destroy one who has earned the friendship of the immortals, so the evil band sought other means of keeping Claus from bringing happiness to children, and so making them obedient. Whenever Claus set out to carry his toys to the little ones, an Awgwa, who had been set to watch his movement, sprang upon him and snatched the toys from his grasp. and the children were no more disappointed than was Claus when he was obliged to return home discomforted. Still, he persevered and made more toys for his little friends, and started with them for the villages, and always the Awgwas robbed him as soon as he left the valley. They threw the stolen playthings into one of their lonely caverns, and quite a heap of toys accumulated before Claus became discouraged and gave up all attempts to leave the valley. Then children began coming to him, since they found he did not go to them. But the wicked Awgwas flew around them and caused their steps to stray, and the paths to become crooked, so never a little one could find a way into the Laughing Valley. Lonely days now fell upon Claus, for he was denied the pleasure of bringing happiness to the children whom he had learned to love. Yet he bore up bravely, for he thought surely the time would come when the Awgwas would abandon their evil design to injure him. He devoted all of his hours to toy making, and when one plaything had been completed, he stood it on a shelf he had built for that purpose. When the shelf became filled with rows of toys, he made another one, and filled that also, so that at the time he had many shelves filled with gay and beautiful toys, representing horses, dogs, cats, elephants, lambs, rabbits, and deer, as well as pretty dolls of all sizes, and balls and marbles of baked clay painted in pretty colors. Often, as he glanced at the array of childish treasures, the heart of the good old Claus became sad. So greatly did he long to carry the toys to his children. And at last, because he could bear it no longer, he ventured to go to the great Auk, to whom he told the story of his persecution by the Awgwas, and begged the Master Woodsman to assist him. Chapter 7. The Great Battle Between Good and Evil. Auk listened gravely to the recital of Claus, stroking his beard the while with the slow, graceful motion that betokened deep thought. He nodded approvingly when Claus had told how the Knooks and Fairies had saved him from death, and frowned when he heard how the Awgwas had stolen the children's toys. At last he said, "From the beginning I have approved the work you are doing among the children of men, and it annoys me that your good deeds should be thwarted by the Awgwas. We immortals have no connection whatsoever with the evil creatures who have attacked you. Always we've avoided them, and they, in turn, have hitherto taken care not to cross our paths. But in this matter, I find they've interfered with one of our friends, and I will ask them to abandon their persecutions, as you are under our protection." Claus thanked the Master Woodsman most gratefully and returned to the valley, while Auk, never delayed carrying out his promises, at once traveled to the mountains of the Awgwas. There, standing on the bare rocks, he called on the king and his people to appear. Instantly the place was filled with throngs of scowling Awgwas, and their king, perching himself on a point of a rock, demanding fiercely, "Who dare calls on us?" "It is I, the Master Woodsman of the world," responded Auk. "Here are no forests for you to claim," cried the king angrily. "We owe no allegiance to you, nor to any immortal." "That is true," replied Auk calmly. "Yet you ventured to interfere with the actions of Claus, who dwells in the Laughing Valley and is under our protection." Many of the Awgwas began muttering at his speech, and their king turned threateningly on the Master Woodsman. "You are set to rule the forest, but the plains and the valleys are ours," he shouted. "Keep to your own dark woods. We will do as we please with Claus." "You shall not harm our friend in any way," replied Auk. "Shall we not?" asked the king imprudently. "You will see. Our powers are vastly superior to those of mortals, and fully as great as those of immortals." "It is your conceit that misleads you," said Auk sternly. "You are a transient race, passing from life into nothingness. We who live forever pity but despise you. On earth you are scorned by all, and in heaven you have no place. Even the mortals, after their earth life, enter another existence for all time, and so are your superiors. How then dare you, who are neither mortal nor immortal, refuse to obey my wish?" The Awgwas sprang to their feet with menacing gestures, but their king motioned them back. "Never before," he cried to Auk, while his voice trembled with rage, Has an immortal declared himself the master of the Aguas? Never shall an immortal venture to interfere with our actions again, for we will avenge your scornful words by killing your friend Claus within 3 days. Nor you, nor all the immortals can save him from our wrath. We defy your powers. Be gone. Master Woodsman of the world, in the country of the Aguas you have no place. It is war, declared Ock with flashing eyes. It is war, returned the king savagely. In 3 days your friend will be dead. The master turned away and came to his forest of Burzee, where he called a meeting of the immortals and told them of the defiance of the Aguas and their purpose to kill Claus within 3 days. The little folk listened to him quietly. What shall we do? Asked Ock. These creatures are of no benefit to the world, said the Prince of the Nooks. We must destroy them. Their lives are devoted only to evil deeds, said the Prince of the Reals. We must destroy them. They have no conscience and endeavor to make all mortals as bad as themselves, said the Queen of the Fairies. We must destroy them. They've defied the great Ock and threatened the life of our adopted son, said beautiful Queen Zerline. We must destroy them. The Master Woodsman smiled. You speak well, said he. The Aguas we know to be a powerful race, and they will fight desperately, yet the outcome is certain, for we who live can never die, even though conquered by our enemies, while every Agua who is struck down is one foe the less to oppress us. Prepare, then, for battle, and let us resolve to show no mercy to the wicked. Thus arose that terrible war between the immortals and the sprites of evil, which is sung of in fairyland to this very day. The King Agua in his hand determined to carry out the threat to destroy Claus. They now hated him for 2 reasons. He made children happy and was a friend of the Master Woodsman. But since Ock's visit they had reason to fear the opposition of the immortals, and they dreaded defeat. So the king sent swift messengers to all parts of the world to summon every evil creature to his aid. And on the 3rd day, after the declaration of war, a mighty army was at the command of the King Agua. Then there were 300 Asiatic dragons, breathing fire that consumed everything it touched. These hated mankind and all good spirits, and there were the 3-eyed giants of Tattery, a host in themselves, who liked nothing better than to fight. And next came the black demons from Patagonia, which great spread wings like those of a bat, which swept terror and misery through the world as they beat upon the air. And joined to those were the Goozle goblins, with long talons as sharp as swords, with which they clawed the flesh from their foes. Finally, every mountain Agua in the world had come to participate in the great battle with the immortals. The King Agua looked around upon the vast army, and his heart beat high with wicked pride, for he believed he would surely triumph over his genuine enemies, who had never before been known to fight. But the Master Woodsman had not been idle. None of his people was used to warfare. Yet now that they were called upon to face the host of evil, they willingly prepared for the fray. Ock had commanded them to assemble in the Laughing Valley, where Claus, ignorant of the terrible battle that was to be waged on his account, was quietly making his toys. Soon the entire valley, from hill to hill, was filled with little immortals. The Master Woodsman stood first, bearing a gleaming axe that shone like burnished silver. Next came the Reals, armed with sharp thorns from bramble bushes. Then the Nooks, bearing the spears they used when they were forced to prod their savage beast into submission. The Fairies, dressed in white gauze with rainbow-hued wings, bore golden wands, and the wood nymphs in their uniform of oak leaf green carried switches from ash trees as weapons. Loud laughed the Agua King when he beheld the size of the arms of his foes. To be sure, the mighty axe of the woodsman was to be dreaded, but the sweet-faced nymphs and pretty fairies, the gentle Reals and the crooked Nooks, were such harmless folk that he almost felt shame at having called such a terrible host to oppose them. Since these fools dare fight, he said to the leader of the Tattery giants, I will overwhelm them with our evil powers. To begin the battle, he poised a great stone in his left hand and cast it full against the sturdy form of the master woodsman, who turned it aside with his axe. Then rushed the three-eyed giants of Tartary upon the Knooks, and the Goozle goblins upon the Ryls, and the fire-breathing dragons upon the sweet fairies. Because the nymphs were Ox-own people, the band of Awgwas sought them out, thinking to overcome them with ease. But it is the law that while evil, unopposed, may accomplish terrible deeds, the powers of good can never be overthrown when opposed to evil. Well it had been for the King Awgwa had he known the law. His ignorance cost him his existence, for one flash of the great axe, borne by the master woodsman of the world, cleft the wicked king in twain, and rid the earth of the vilest creature it contained. Greatly marveled the Tartary giants when the spears of the little Knooks pierced their thick walls of flesh and sent them reeling to the ground with howls of agony. Woe came upon the sharp-taloned goblins when the thorns of the Ryls reached their savage hearts and left their lifeblood sprinkle all the plain, and afterward from every drop a thistle grew. The dragons paused astonished before the fairy wands, from whence rushed a power that caused their fiery breath to flow back on themselves, so that they shriveled away and died. As for the Awgwas, they had scant time to realize how they were destroyed, for the ash switches of the nymphs bore a charm unknown to any Awgwa, and they turned their foes into clods of earth at the slightest touch. When Ak leaned upon his gleaming axe and turned to look over the field of battle, he saw the few giants who were able to run, disappearing over the distant hills on their return to Tartary. This goblin has perished every one, as had the terrible dragons, while all that remained of the wicked Awgwas was a great number of earthen hillocks clodding the plain. And now the immortals melted from the valley, like dew at sunrise, to resume their duties in the forest, while Ak walked slowly and thoughtfully to the house of Claus and entered. "You have many toys ready for the children," said the woodsman, "and now you may carry them across the plains to the dwellings in the village without fear." "Will not the Awgwas harm me?" asked Claus eagerly. "The Awgwas have been perished," said Ak. "Now I would gladly have done with wicked spirits and with the fighting and with the bloodshed. It was not from choice that I told of the Awgwas and their allies, and of their great battle with the immortals. They were part of the history and could not be avoided." And I think that's going to be a good place to stop for today. I try to keep these videos about 30 minutes or less. So, what was your favorite part, Mac? Are you still enjoying the story? I hope everybody else is. Thanks for listening, guys. Like, share, subscribe. And tomorrow I'll be back. Until then, good night.